When my son told me I was not welcome for Christmas, I smiled, put my truck in reverse, and initiated a financial apocalypse. I pulled my 2010 Ford F-150 across 3 lanes of traffic, leaving a trail of burnt rubber on the asphalt, while the scent of my homemade hickory smoked ribs filled the cab. "Dad, Paige is stressed, her parents are here, and it is just awkward," my son had whispered over the phone like a coward. 2 days later, my phone screen was lit up with 58 missed calls and a notification that their $1.2 million home had been sealed by the bank. Before I tell you how I dismantled my son's life in 48 hours, please like and subscribe and tell me in the comments where you are watching this story of justice from. I was cruising down Interstate 95 and the heater in my old truck was rattling, but it was keeping me warm enough. The cab smelled like heaven. Specifically, it smelled like brown sugar paprika and slow-roasted pork. I had been awake since 4 in the morning tending to the smoker in my backyard, just like I had done every Christmas for 30 years. On the passenger seat beside me sat 3 trays of my signature barbecue ribs wrapped in foil, a sweet potato pie that was still warm, and a cooler full of collard greens seasoned with smoked turkey necks. This was not just food, it was my history. It was the way my mother showed love, and it was the way I showed love. I checked my rearview mirror and smoothed my gray beard. I might drive a beat-up truck and wear flannel shirts that have seen better days, but today I felt like a king. I was heading to see my son Tyson and my grandson Jordan. I checked the time on the dashboard clock. 11:30 in the morning. I was making good time. I would arrive at their gated community in Connecticut right around noon, just in time to get the food on the table. I thought about Jordan's face when he saw the new baseball glove I had hidden behind the seat. I thought about Tyson. He was a good boy, or at least he used to be. Lately he had changed. Ever since he married Paige, things had been different. Paige was 28 years old, white, and lived her entire life through the lens of an Instagram filter. She tolerated me at best. I knew she looked down on my truck. I knew she looked down on my clothes. She thought I was just a retired old black man scraping by on a pension. She had no idea that I was the former chief financial officer of a global logistics firm, or that I owned commercial real estate in 3 states. I never told her. I never told Tyson the full extent of it either. I wanted them to build their own character. My phone buzzed on the magnetic mount. It was Tyson. I tapped the speakerphone button and smiled. "Hey son, I am about 20 minutes out. I hope you guys are hungry because this pie is perfect." There was a silence on the other end. It was not a comfortable silence. It was the heavy, thick silence of bad news. Tyson cleared his throat. "Hey Dad, look about today," he was whispering. Why was he whispering in his own house? "Is everything okay, son?" I asked, my foot easing off the gas slightly. "Yeah, everything is fine. It is just that Paige is really stressed out right now. Her parents just flew in from Connecticut this morning. It was a surprise." I frowned. "Okay, that is fine. There is plenty of food. I brought enough for an army. You know I always overcook. I can set an extra couple of plates." Tyson sighed, and I could hear the nervousness in his breath. "That is the thing, Dad. Her parents are, well, they are a little different. They are not used to your kind of volume. They are very reserved people. And frankly, Paige is worried that having you there might be overwhelming. We were thinking that maybe this year we should just keep it intimate. Just us and her parents." My grip tightened on the steering wheel. My kind of volume. I knew exactly what that meant. But before I could respond, I heard her voice in the background. It was faint, but clear enough. Paige's voice was shrill and demanding. "Tyson, tell him not to bring that greasy soul food. My mother is on a strict keto diet and I do not want the smell of pork fat lingering on my silk curtains. Tell him we will see him in January." The words hit me like a physical blow. Greasy soul food, lingering smells. January. Tyson came back on the line, his voice shaking. "Yeah, Dad. So maybe we can do a late Christmas next week. Just you and me. I think it is best if you turn around. I am sorry. I did not say a word. I did not beg. I did not ask why I was being excluded from my grandson's Christmas while her parents were being welcomed with open arms." I felt a coldness spread from my chest down to my stomach. It was a familiar coldness. It was the same coldness I felt in the boardroom when I had to execute a hostile takeover. It was the absence of emotion. It was the arrival of clarity. I looked at the passenger seat, the foil-wrapped ribs that I had spent 12 hours smoking, the pie I had baked from my grandmother's recipe. I looked at the gift-wrapped baseball glove. I realized in that moment that I had been playing the role of the doting father, while Tyson had been playing the role of the embarrassed son. He was ashamed of me. He was ashamed of my blackness. He was ashamed of my culture, and he was ashamed of the very things that had paid for his private school education. "Okay, son," I said finally. My voice was steady, level, and deep. "I understand. You want a private Christmas. I hope you have exactly the Christmas you deserve." "Dad, wait, I just mean—" Tyson started to stammer, but I reached out and tapped the red button. The call ended. The silence in the cab was deafening. My hands were shaking. Not from sadness, but from a rage so pure it felt like white heat. I checked my mirrors. The highway was busy, but I saw a gap in the median used for emergency vehicles. I did not care about the traffic laws. I cranked the wheel hard to the left. My tires screamed against the pavement as I swung the heavy truck around. Horns blared around me. A sedan swerved. I did not flinch. I straightened the wheel and pressed the accelerator, heading back the way I came. I was not going home to cry. I was not going home to eat leftovers alone in the dark. I was going to war. I drove for 5 minutes until I saw a rest stop. I pulled the truck into the furthest parking spot away from the building. I killed the engine. The only sound was the ticking of the cooling motor and my own breathing. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my iPhone. It was an older model with a cracked screen protector, another detail that made Paige think I was destitute. I unlocked it and opened my banking app. I did not go to the checking account I used for groceries. I navigated to the private wealth management section. The interface changed from blue to black and gold. Face ID confirmed my identity, Lucius Coleman. Portfolio value. The numbers were long, but I ignored them. I went to the scheduled transfers tab. There it was. A recurring monthly transfer scheduled for the 24th of every month. Recipient Tyson Coleman. Label mortgage support. Amount $6,500. For 3 years I had been paying the mortgage on that sprawling colonial house in Connecticut. Tyson told me his salary as a marketing director was mostly commission-based and things were tight. I wanted him to have a good start. I wanted Jordan to have a backyard. So I stepped in. I told him I would handle the mortgage payments directly so he could focus on building his savings. I never asked for thanks, I just paid it. $6,500 every single month like clockwork. And this is how he repaid me. By banishing me because his wife thought my food smelled too black for her parents. I stared at the transfer scheduled to go out tomorrow morning on Christmas Eve. My thumb hovered over the screen. I did not hesitate. I tapped the payment. A menu popped up. Edit or cancel. I pressed cancel. A warning box appeared asking if I was sure. I pressed yes. The screen refreshed. Next scheduled payment, none. But I was not done. Canceling the payment was just a slap on the wrist. I needed to drop a hammer. I exited the app and opened my contacts. I scrolled down to B. Banks. Jonathan Banks. My personal attorney and the shark I kept on retainer for my real estate dealings. It was Christmas Eve, but Banks would answer. He always answered me. The phone rang twice. Lucius Banks said, his voice crisp. "Merry Christmas. I assume this isn't a social call." "It isn't," I said. My voice was gravel. "I need you to pull the file on the property at 442 Oakwood Drive, Tyson's house," Banks asked. "Is everything all right?" "No," I said. "I want you to look at the deed structure. When I bought that debt from the bank 2 years ago, we set up a shell company to hold the note correct." "That is correct," Banks confirmed. "Coleman Holdings LLC is the lien holder. Technically, you are the bank. Tyson thinks the mortgage is with Wells Fargo, but the servicing rights were transferred to us. We just kept the interface looking standard to not bruise his ego." "Good," I said. "Listen to me carefully, Jonathan. I want to activate the acceleration clause." There was a pause on the line. "Lucius, the acceleration clause is for default. Technically, he hasn't defaulted if you have been making the payments for him. Check the insurance records," I said. I remembered a letter I saw on Tyson's counter months ago, a notice about lapsed homeowners insurance. He threw it in the trash, saying he would get to it later. Knowing Tyson, he never did. Check if the policy is active. I heard the sound of typing on the other end. Hang on, accessing the database. More typing. You are right. "The policy lapsed 60 days ago. That is a breach of contract." "Perfect," I said. "Since the contract is breached, I want to call the loan. The full amount, $1.2 million. Due immediately." Lucius Banks sounded hesitant. "It is Christmas. This is your son. If we do this, the foreclosure process starts automatically. The sheriff will serve a notice. The locks get changed. It is nuclear. He told me I wasn't welcome in the house I pay for. I said, my voice flat. He told me I smell. He chose his wife's racism over his father's dignity. Do it, Jonathan. Send the notice. And freeze the auxiliary credit lines attached to the house equity. Are you sure? Banks asked one last time. I looked at the cold ribs on the seat beside me. I looked at the baseball glove that Jordan would not be getting tomorrow. I have never been more sure in my life, I said. Execute it. I hung up the phone. I sat there for a moment watching the snow start to fall on the windshield. I felt lighter. The burden of supporting a man who did not respect me was gone. I put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the highway. I was going home to eat my ribs in peace. My son wanted a private Christmas. I was going to ensure he had a Christmas he would never forget. The kind where the lights go out and the doors stay locked. 2 days passed in a silence so heavy it felt like it had physical weight. I sat in my leather recliner in my den nursing a glass of bourbon and staring at my phone. It was December 26th. Christmas had come and gone. I had spent it alone eating the ribs I had intended for my family while watching old westerns. I checked my phone logs. 0 missed calls from Tyson, 0 text messages, 0 voicemails. My son had not even reached out to see if I had made it home safely after spinning my truck around on the highway. He had erased me. But while his voice was silent, his spending was loud. My phone vibrated against the mahogany side table. It was a notification from American Express, a charge of $1,200 at a French wine importer. Authorized user Tyson Coleman. An hour later, another vibration. $500 at the Serenity Day Spa. Authorized user Paige Coleman. They were using the supplementary platinum cards I had given them for emergencies to celebrate my absence. They were drinking vintage Bordeaux and getting deep tissue massages on my dime while I sat in an empty house. I did not get angry. Anger is a waste of energy. I got curious. I reached for my iPad and opened the Smart Home application. When I bought that colonial house for them 3 years ago, I insisted on installing a top-tier security system. I told Tyson it was for his safety, but in reality I wanted to protect my asset. I knew Tyson was too lazy to ever change the master administrative passwords. I logged in. The feed loaded instantly in high definition. The camera in the living room showed a scene of domestic bliss that made my stomach turn. Tyson was sitting on the floor opening gifts. Paige was lounging on the sofa in a silk robe. And there, sitting in the armchairs I had paid for, were her parents, the Millers. They were holding crystal glasses filled with the dark red wine I had just paid for. I turned up the volume on the iPad. The audio was crisp. Paige's father, a man named Richard Miller who wore ascots indoors to hide his lack of character, was laughing. He gestured around the room with his wine glass. You know, Tyson, it is a relief your father did not show up. The last thing we needed was him tracking mud in here with his work boots. He probably smells like fertilizer. Does he even own a suit? Paige giggled, sipping her wine. Oh, Dad, be nice. Lucius tries his best. He just does not understand how to behave in polite society. He is very rustic. He thinks showing up with a truckload of greasy meat is sophisticated. We just wanted a classy Christmas without having to explain table manners to the help. I waited for Tyson to defend me. I waited for my son, the boy I had put through college, the man whose mortgage I paid to stand up and say that his father was a former CFO who could buy and sell Richard Miller 10 times over. I waited for him to say that my hands were calloused from hard work, not from being simple. But Tyson just laughed. He swirled his wine and laughed along with them. Yeah, you are right. Dad is a lot. It is better this way. He is happier with his own kind anyway. I froze. The screen blurred for a second. His own kind. That was it. That was the moment the last thread of sentimental attachment snapped. I looked at Richard Miller on the screen. The man was acting like a lord in a castle, but I knew the truth. I knew exactly who the Millers were. I set the iPad down on the table, face down. I needed to think about the irony of this situation. 2 years ago, Richard Miller had called me in a panic. He did not know who I really was. He just knew I was Tyson's father and that I seemed to have stable finances. He told me he was facing Chapter 7 bankruptcy. His real estate investments in Florida had imploded and the IRS was auditing him. He was going to lose everything. He begged me not to tell Paige because he did not want to worry her. I listened. I did not like the man, but I did not want my daughter-in-law to be burdened with her parents' financial ruin. I wanted Tyson's life to be stress-free. So I made a few calls. I set up a shell corporation in Delaware. I bought Richard Miller's debt from his creditors for pennies on the dollar, and I restructured it. I effectively bailed him out. Technically, I owned Richard Miller. I owned his debt, I owned his house in Connecticut, and I owned his dignity. He just did not know it was me. He thought he had been saved by an anonymous angel investor. And here he was sitting in my house, drinking my wine, calling me a gardener. And my son was agreeing with him. I had saved them from the street, and they were spitting in my face. They thought their whiteness and their pretension made them superior. They thought my silence was ignorance. They were about to learn that my silence was simply the quiet before the execution. I picked up my phone again. It was time. I scrolled to Jonathan Banks' contact. I did not care that it was the day after Christmas. I did not care if he was on vacation. I hit dial. He answered on the second ring. Lucius Banks said, "I got your message about the mortgage acceleration. The paperwork is drafted. We are ready to serve them." "Good," I said. My voice was calm, cold, and devoid of any mercy. "But we are going to escalate. I want you to execute Phase 2 immediately." "Phase 2?" Banks asked. "You mean the vehicles?" "Yes," I said. "The Porsche Macan Page drives. The lease is in my name. I am the primary account holder. She is just an authorized driver. Report it as an unauthorized use of asset. I want it repossessed. Today. Right now. I want the tow truck in their driveway before they finish that bottle of wine." "Done," Banks said. I can hear him typing. "Anything else?" "Yes," I said. "The credit cards, the Amex Platinum they are using. It is a supplementary account linked to my black card. Flag it as compromised. Freeze it. Not just a temporary hold, Jonathan. I want it terminated." Banks paused. "Lucius, if we do that, they will be stranded. They have no liquidity. I ran a soft credit check on Tyson like you asked. He is maxed out on his personal cards. If you cut the Amex, they have zero purchasing power." "That is the point," I said. "They want to live a champagne life on a beer budget. I am cutting off the tap. Do it." I hung up the phone. I leaned back in my chair and watched the clock. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then 15. My phone lit up on the table. It was a notification from the American Express app. Transaction declined. Whole Foods Market. Amount $340. I smiled. They must have run out of wine. They went to the store to restock for their fancy brunch. And now they were standing at the checkout counter realizing that the magic plastic card was just a piece of useless metal. I poured myself another glass of bourbon. The show was just beginning. The morning of December 23rd broke cold and bright over the manicured lawns of Connecticut. From the vantage point of my home security app, I watched the scene unfold with the patience of a sniper waiting for a target. It was 10 in the morning. Tyson and Paige were preparing to leave for a brunch that they could no longer afford. On the screen, I saw the front door open. Paige stepped out first, looking like she had stepped off a runway. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere coat that I knew cost $3,000 because I had seen the charge on the supplementary card before I canceled it. She had oversized sunglasses perched on her nose, and she was holding a designer clutch like a shield. Tyson followed her, adjusting the cuffs of his blazer. He looked the part of the successful executive he pretended to be. He looked like a man who owned the world. They were laughing. They were talking about mimosas and eggs Benedict. They had absolutely no idea that their credit cards were dead plastic and their world was about to dissolve. They walked toward the detached 3-car garage. I switched camera views to the driveway feed. I watched Tyson press the keypad to open the garage door. The heavy door began to roll up slowly. I leaned forward in my chair, my coffee mug suspended halfway to my mouth. This was the moment. The door reached the top. The sunlight flooded the garage. It was empty. The spot where the gleaming white Porsche Macan usually sat was vacant. All that remained were a few oil stains on the concrete and the fresh, heavy drag marks of a tow truck's tires leading down the driveway. I saw Paige freeze. Her hand went to her mouth. She dropped her clutch on the asphalt. Tyson ran into the empty space, spinning around in circles as if the 2-ton vehicle might be hiding in a corner. He ran back out to the driveway, looking frantically up and down the street. His mouth was moving. I turned up the volume. "Where is it? Where is the car?" Tyson was screaming. He sounded like a child who had lost a toy. Paige was hysterical. Her composure shattered instantly. Someone stole it. "Oh my God, Tyson! Someone stole my Porsche!" Call the police. Call 911 right now. We are being targeted. I took a sip of my coffee. The bitterness of the dark roast was perfect. They thought they were victims of a crime. They were victims of consequences. I watched Tyson fumble for his phone, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. He dialed. He paced back and forth, kicking at the snow. They came into our house. They stole our car. He was yelling into the phone. Yes, right now. My wife is terrified. Send someone immediately. I closed the app for a moment. I did not need to see the waiting. I knew the police response time in that neighborhood was less than 5 minutes. I wanted to let the anticipation build. I walked to my kitchen window and looked out at my own modest backyard. It was covered in a thin layer of frost. It was quiet. It was peaceful. I owned everything I saw. I owed nothing to anyone. It was a freedom Tyson had never understood because I had never forced him to earn it. That ended today. 10 minutes later, I reopened the app. A patrol car was parked in the driveway, lights flashing silently. A uniformed officer was standing with a notepad looking bored while Paige gestured wildly at the empty garage. She was crying now, but it was the angry crying of an entitled woman who has been inconvenienced. "Officer, you need to put out an APB." Paige shrieked. "It is a white Macan, custom interior. It was right here. Who steals a car from a gated community?" The officer held up a hand. "Ma'am, please calm down. I need the license plate number and the registration details. Who is the registered owner of the vehicle?" Tyson stepped forward, trying to regain some dignity. "I am." "Well, technically, my father handles the lease paperwork for tax purposes, but it is my car. I am the primary driver." The officer nodded and walked back to his cruiser to run the information. I watched the neighbors starting to gather. The curtains in the house across the street twitched. Mrs. Henderson, a woman who lived for gossip, was standing on her porch in her bathrobe, pretending to pick up a newspaper that had been delivered hours ago. She was watching everything. This was the audience Paige performed for, and now she was the main act in a tragedy. The officer returned a few minutes later. His demeanor had changed. He was no longer taking notes. He tucked his pen into his pocket and adjusted his belt. "Mr. Coleman, Mrs. Coleman, there has been no theft." "What do you mean?" Paige snapped. "The car is gone. Of course there has been a theft. Are you blind?" The officer's face hardened. "Ma'am, watch your tone. I ran the VIN and the registration. The vehicle was not stolen. It was repossessed." "Repossessed?" Tyson laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "That is impossible. The payments are automatic. My father pays them. There must be a mistake." "There is no mistake," the officer said, his voice flat. "The repossession order was filed this morning by the legal owner of the vehicle, a Mr. Lucius Coleman. He reported unauthorized use of the asset and exercised his right to reclaim the property. The tow company logged the pickup at 8:15 this morning. It was a lawful recovery. The silence that followed was absolute. I could see the color drain from Paige's face. She looked at the neighbors. She saw Mrs. Henderson watching. She saw the landscaping crew 2 houses down leaning on their rakes. The shame hit her like a physical wave. Repossessed. It was a dirty word in their world. It meant failure. It meant poverty. "Your father," Paige whispered, turning to Tyson. "Your father did this. He took my car." Tyson looked like he was going to be sick. He looked at the officer, then at the empty garage, then at his wife. The officer tipped his hat. "Since no crime has been committed, I am going to clear the call. Have a nice day, folks." The cruiser backed out. Paige let out a scream of pure rage. She turned on Tyson and shoved him hard in the chest. "You told me he was just a harmless old man. You told me he would never do anything. He just humiliated us in front of the whole neighborhood. Fix this, Tyson. Fix this right now." She stormed back into the house, slamming the front door so hard the wreath fell off. Tyson stood alone in the driveway, the cold wind whipping his expensive coat. He pulled out his phone again. My phone rang in my hand. I looked at the caller ID. "Son." I let it ring twice before answering. "Hello, Tyson." My voice was calm. "Dad, what the hell is wrong with you?" Tyson screamed. His voice was cracking. "The police were just here. You had the car towed. Are you insane? Paige is in there crying her eyes out. The neighbors saw everything. You made me look like a fool. You humiliated me." I walked back to my recliner and sat down. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. "I did not make you look like a fool, Tyson. You did that yourself when you decided to bite the hand that feeds you. The car is in my name. The lease is in my name. The insurance is in my name. You were just an authorized driver, and as of this morning, your authorization is revoked. It is my car, Tyson shouted. You gave it to us. I gave you the use of it, I corrected him. Just like I gave you the use of the house. Just like I gave you the use of my credit cards. I gave those things to my son and my daughter-in-law. But since I am apparently not welcome in your family, I fail to see why my assets should be welcome in your garage. Dad, you are being petty. This is because of Christmas, isn't it? Because we wanted one day of privacy. You are punishing us because you got your feelings hurt. It is a car, Dad. Paige needs it for her image. She is an influencer. She cannot be seen taking an Uber. Bring it back. Bring it back right now, and maybe we can talk about letting you come over for New Year's. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. You think you are in a position to negotiate, Tyson? You think you can barter with me using your presence as currency? You have overvalued yourself, son. This is ridiculous, Tyson spat. You are a bitter old man. You are lonely and you want to control us. Well, guess what? It stops now. Good, I said. I am glad we agree. It stops now. Tyson went quiet for a second. I could hear his breathing heavy and ragged. Then his voice dropped. It became lower, meaner. It was the voice of a cornered animal. Okay, Dad. You want to play hardball? Fine. You took the car. You want to cut us off? Fine. But remember this. You have a grandson. You have Jordan. And if you think you are ever going to see him again, you are out of your mind. I felt my blood turn to ice. My hand gripped the phone so tight the plastic creaked. Jordan, my sweet, innocent grandson who sat on my lap while I read him stories. Jordan, who I was building a trust fund for. Tyson was using a child as a weapon. What did you say? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. You heard me, Tyson said, and I could hear the smirk in his voice. He thought he had found my weak spot. He thought he had played the ace. I am his father. I decide who sees him, and I am deciding right now. As long as you are holding on to that car and acting like a tyrant, you are dead to him. No visits, no calls, no photos, nothing. You want to be alone, Dad. Congratulations, you are alone. My vision blurred. The red rage I had felt on the highway returned, but this time it was darker. It was deeper. He was ransoming my own flesh and blood for a Porsche. He was willing to sever the bond between a grandfather and a grandson over a leased vehicle. Is that your final play, Tyson? I asked. Are you sure you want to go down this road? Because there is no turning back from this. I am sure, Tyson said. Bring the car back by noon or say goodbye to Jordan forever. I did not say another word. I did not yell. I simply pressed the end call button. I sat in the silence of my living room. My eyes felt hot and gritty. My heart was pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. He had crossed the line. He had taken the one thing that was sacred, and he had dragged it into the mud of his own greed. He thought he had leverage. He thought he could hurt me into submission. He was wrong. He had just freed me from the last constraint of mercy. I looked at the photo of Jordan on my mantle. I touched the frame gently. I am sorry, little man, I whispered. This is going to get ugly. But your daddy needs to learn a lesson he will never forget. I stood up and walked to my desk. I unlocked the top drawer and pulled out a thick red file. It was the file labeled Oakwood Drive mortgage note. I opened it and looked at the wet ink signature on the promissory note. Tyson Coleman. I picked up my phone and dialed Jonathan Banks again. Do it, I said. Do what Lucius Banks asked. Everything, I said. File the foreclosure. Serve the eviction notice. Cut the utilities. Freeze the trust. Burn it all down, Jonathan. He used the boy. There was a pause on the line. Then Banks spoke, his voice grim. Understood. I am filing the paperwork now. The process server will be there within the hour. I hung up. The war was no longer about money. It was about survival. And I was the only one in this fight who knew how to survive with nothing. Tyson was about to find out what winter really felt like. I sat in my home office surrounded by the mahogany bookshelves that held the true history of my life. My hands were steady now. The trembling rage from the phone call had solidified into a cold, hard resolve. Tyson had made a fatal error. He had threatened to weaponize my grandson against me. He thought denying me access to Jordan was a power move, but he failed to realize that by severing the emotional tie, he had also severed the only thing protecting him from my business instincts. I looked at the wall safe behind my desk. Inside were the ledgers of Coleman Holdings, LLC, the private equity firm I had built over 40 years. Tyson thought I was a retired man living on a pension. He did not know that my net worth was north of $20 million, or that I owned the paper on half the commercial strip malls in the county. He saw a father to be exploited. I saw a delinquent asset that needed to be liquidated. I reached for my Mont Blanc pen, the one I used to sign acquisitions, and pulled a fresh legal pad toward me. I was done being a parent. I was now a creditor. And creditors do not have feelings. They have terms and conditions. I opened the thick red file labeled Oakwood Drive. I ran my finger down the fine print of the mortgage agreement. I knew exactly what I was looking for. When I bought the debt on Tyson's house, I kept the standard banking covenants in place. I did it to protect the investment, but I never thought I would use them against my own blood. But here it was, Clause 17, Section B, regarding unauthorized structural modifications. I remembered a conversation from 6 months ago. Tyson had bragged about tearing out the load-bearing wall in the garage to install a mirrored gym for Paige. He had sent me photos of the demolition. He never pulled a permit. He never asked the lien holder for permission. That was a material breach of contract. It was the legal equivalent of handing me a loaded gun. I picked up the phone and called Jonathan Banks. He answered on the first ring, knowing that things had escalated. "Draft the letter." "Jonathan," I said, my voice devoid of warmth. "We are exercising the acceleration clause immediately." "On what grounds?" Banks asked. "The insurance lapse is good, but a judge might give him 30 days to cure it. We need something immediate." "Structural damage and unauthorized modification," I said. "He compromised the integrity of the collateral when he gutted the garage. I have the photos he sent me. It is a violation of the preservation of property clause. Demand full payment of the principal balance plus interest and penalties. $1.2 million. Due upon receipt." Banks let out a low whistle. "Lucius, that is a nuclear option. Acceleration clauses are usually reserved for commercial defaults. If you serve him with this, he has to pay the entire mortgage instantly or we foreclose. He can't just pay the arrears. He has to buy the house." "I know what it means," I said, cutting him off. "I wrote the contract. Send it via courier. I want it in his hand within the hour. And Jonathan, add a personal note from the lender. Tell him that any attempt to sell fixtures or appliances to raise cash will be considered theft of collateral." I hung up and turned back to my computer. I pulled up the loan servicing dashboard. I watched the status change from current to default. It was a simple click of a mouse, but it felt like slamming a heavy iron gate. Tyson wanted to play the big man. He wanted to banish me. He wanted to hold my grandson hostage. Now he was going to learn that the roof over his head was held up by my goodwill, and that goodwill had just evaporated. I leaned back in my leather chair. I was not happy. I felt a deep, hollow ache in my chest. But I also felt the grim satisfaction of a man who finally respects himself enough to stop the bleeding. 5 miles away, the reality of my decision was about to hit Tyson in the most public way possible. I checked the GPS tracker on the family account, another little detail Tyson forgot I paid for. They were at Whole Foods. Of course they were. They had no car, so they must have taken an Uber. They were trying to salvage their Christmas brunch. I could picture it perfectly. Paige in her designer sunglasses trying to pretend she hadn't just been humiliated by a tow truck. Her parents, Richard and Linda, walking behind her, putting items in the cart without looking at the prices because they assumed the Coleman money train was still running. I imagined them in the aisles. They would be buying imported cheeses, truffle oil, organic steaks, and expensive champagne. They were filling a cart with $500 worth of groceries to feed their delusions of grandeur. They were soothing their bruised egos with consumption. Paige was likely complaining about me to her mother, calling me petty and vindictive while throwing a $50 candle into the basket. Tyson was probably trailing behind them, checking his phone, hoping I would call and apologize, hoping I would bring the car back. He still didn't get it. He still thought this was a timeout. He didn't realize he had been expelled. They reached the checkout. I could see the transaction attempt hit the system in real time on my monitor. The cashier, a young woman who probably worked 2 jobs to survive, would be scanning the items. Beep, 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 the total climbing higher, $300, $400, $580. Tyson would step up. He would pull out the black Amex Platinum card, the supplementary one linked to my account. He would hand it over with that casual arrogance he had adopted since marrying Paige. He would not even look at the total. The cashier would swipe the card. And then the silence. The machine would not beep. It would buzz. A harsh, low sound. Declined. I watched the notification pop up on my screen. Transaction denied. Reason account closed by primary administrator. I leaned forward, closing my eyes, imagining the scene. Tyson would frown. He would laugh nervously. Try it again, he would say. The chip is finicky. The cashier would swipe it again. Declined. Sir, the machine says the account is closed, she would say, loud enough for the people in line behind them to hear. That is impossible, Tyson would snap. My father pays this bill. It has a $50,000 limit. Run it manually. The cashier would shake her head. I cannot run it, sir. The system says to confiscate the card. Tyson's face would go pale. Page would step in. Just use your other card, Tyson. The Visa. He would pull out his personal Visa. Declined. Over limit. He would try his debit card. Declined. Insufficient funds. The line behind them would be getting restless. People would be shifting their feet, sighing, checking their watches. The shame would be starting to prickle at the back of Page's neck. Richard Page's father would clear his throat. What is the holdup, Tyson? We have guests coming. Tyson would turn to his father-in-law, sweat beading on his forehead. Richard, I think there is a fraud alert on my cards. The bank must have frozen them because of the unusual activity. Do you mind getting this one? I will Venmo you as soon as we get home. This was the moment the house of cards collapsed. Richard Miller, the man who looked down on me, the man who called me a gardener, froze. He patted his pockets. He looked at his wife, Linda. Oh, Tyson, I did not bring my wallet. Richard would lie. We left everything at the house. We assumed you were treating since we are guests. I knew the truth. Richard Miller did not leave his wallet. His wallet was empty. His credit score was in the fives. He was living off a stipend I secretly provided to Paige to keep her from nagging Tyson about her parents' poverty. He could not pay for a pack of gum, let alone $600 of groceries. Paige would look at her mother. Mom, what about you? Linda would look away, feigning interest in a magazine rack. I only have cash for the Uber, dear. The cashier would look at them. The manager would be walking over. Sir, if you cannot pay for these items, we need to restock them. We have other customers waiting. The humiliation would be total. The groceries, the steak, the wine, the cheese would stay on the counter. They would have to walk away. They would have to walk past the line of people, past the judging eyes with nothing but their empty hands. They walked out of the automatic doors into the biting cold of the parking lot. They had no Porsche to hide in. They had to stand on the curb, shivering, waiting for a rideshare app to connect them to a stranger's Honda Civic. I could hear Paige screaming even from miles away. It was a scream of pure entitlement meeting reality. Why is this happening? She shrieked, her voice cracking. Why does the card not work? Why did your father do this? Tyson did not answer. He stared at his phone at the banking app that showed red zeros across the board. Because he owns us, Paige, he whispered. Because we never actually paid for anything. Richard Miller scoffed, trying to regain his composure. This is unacceptable, Tyson. Your father is a tyrant. He is holding the purse strings to manipulate you. You need to stand up to him. Stand up to him with what Tyson snapped, losing his temper. With what money, Richard? You do not have any. I do not have any. He just cut the cord. The Uber pulled up, a beat-up sedan with a dent in the bumper. They piled in, squeezing 4 adults into the back seat. Paige was sobbing now. Why does he have so much power? She cried. He is just an old man. He lives in a small house. How can he turn off our lives like this? Tyson looked out the window as the car pulled away. He finally spoke the truth he had been hiding from her and from himself. Because he is not just an old man, Paige. He is the one who bought the debt. He is the one who signs the checks. And I think we just realized that we were never the owners of that life. We were just the pets. I watched the GPS dot of their Uber move slowly back toward the house. A house that in less than 30 minutes would have a foreclosure notice taped to the front door. They were returning to a siege, and I was the general who had just ordered the bombardment. The night of Christmas Eve settled over my small neighborhood like a heavy blanket. Inside my modest brick house, the air was warm and smelled of cinnamon and the hickory smoke that still clung to my clothes from the morning. I sat in the dark watching the snow fall past the streetlights. I was eating the ribs alone. They were tender, falling off the bone, perfectly seasoned, and yet they tasted like ash in my mouth. My phone sat on the table silent. I had silenced the notifications, but I could still see the screen lighting up every few minutes with calls from unknown numbers. Creditors. The bank. Tyson trying to reach me from a burner phone because I had blocked his main number. I ignored them all. I was finding a strange kind of peace in the solitude, a peace born from the absolute certainty that I was finally doing the right thing. Then at 8:15, the front gate buzzer rang. It was a harsh sound that cut through the quiet of the house. I did not move immediately. I finished my glass of water, wiped my mouth with a paper napkin, and walked slowly to the security monitor mounted by the front door. The camera feed flickered to life in black and white night vision. There they were. Tyson and Paige standing shivering in the snow outside my iron security gate. Tyson was holding Jordan. My grandson was wrapped in a thick coat, his small face red from the cold, looking confused and tired. Paige was clutching a foil-wrapped dish that looked suspiciously like a store-bought fruitcake. But what caught my eye was the background. Parked at the curb with the engine running and the exhaust puffing white clouds into the air was the beat-up sedan they had taken from the grocery store. In the back seat, I could see two silhouettes huddled together, Richard and Linda Miller. They had not even bothered to get out of the car. They were too good to stand on my porch, but not too good to eat my food if I let them in. They sent my son and my grandson to the door like beggars while they waited in the warmth. It was a tableau of cowardice that made my jaw tighten. I pressed the talk button on the intercom. I did not unlock the gate. "Who is it?" I asked, my voice rough and distorted by the speaker. "It is us," Dad Tyson said. He leaned into the camera, his face distorted by the wide-angle lens. "Open the gate. It is freezing out here." "Jordan is cold." I looked at my grandson. He did not look happy. He looked like a prop in a stage play he did not understand. I felt a pang of guilt, but I shoved it down. I was not the one keeping him out in the cold. His father was. "I thought you wanted a private Christmas," I said. "Dad, please," Tyson said. "Just open the gate." Then Paige stepped forward. She pushed Tyson aside and looked directly into the camera lens. She put on a smile that was so bright and so false it was almost blinding. "Hi, Pop Pop," she said, using the nickname she knew I loved for Jordan. "Look, we are so sorry about earlier. It was all just a big misunderstanding. Stress makes people say crazy things. We brought dessert. We just want to be together as a family. It is Christmas Eve after all. You should not be alone." I listened to her pitch. It was smooth, practiced, and completely hollow. She was trying to charm the lock open. She thought I was a lonely old man desperate for scraps of affection. She thought she could dazzle me with a smile and erase the humiliation of the morning. "A misunderstanding," I repeated. "That is an interesting word for it, Paige. Is that what you call it when you tell your husband I smell like grease? Is that what you call it when you banish me from my own investment?" Paige's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she recovered. "Oh, Lucius, you know how I get when I am hosting. I just wanted everything to be perfect. I did not mean anything by it. We love you. We really do. Please let us in. My parents are in the car and they are dying to meet you properly." I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. "They are dying to meet me." "That is funny, Paige. Because 2 hours ago I was scrolling through Instagram. I saw your story, the one you posted from the Uber." Paige's face went slack. Her eyes darted to the side. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and held it up to the indoor microphone so she could hear me reading it. "Let me refresh your memory," I said. "Picture of you looking sad in a car. Caption reads, 'Finally cutting out the toxic energy. Sometimes you have to leave the past behind to level up. Hashtag fresh start. Hashtag no more drama.'" I looked back at the monitor. Paige was pale. She had blocked me on Instagram months ago, but she forgot that I have a burner account I use to monitor my tenants. "I see everything." "You posted that at 6:00, I said. 2 hours ago you were celebrating cutting me off. You were calling me toxic. And now that you are hungry and cold and your credit cards are dead, suddenly I am family again. Suddenly you want to come into my house." "Lucius, that wasn't about you." Paige stammered, her voice rising an octave. "That was about work. I was talking about a client." "Do not lie to me," I snapped. My voice boomed through the intercom speaker, making them both jump. "I am old Paige, but I am not stupid. You think I am a senile checkbook. You think you can insult me online and then come eat my food because your parents are broke and you have nowhere else to go." "Dad, stop it," Tyson interrupted. He stepped in front of Paige, shielding her. His patience had evaporated. The mask of the apologetic son fell away, revealing the entitled brat underneath. He looked angry now. He looked like he wanted to hit something. "Open the damn gate," he shouted, kicking the iron bars. "We are hungry. The fridge at the house is empty. We have no money for food because you froze everything. You made your point, okay? You flexed your power. You showed us who is boss. Now be a father and let us in." My in-laws have not eaten since breakfast. I watched him tantrum. He was 32 years old and he was kicking a gate because he hadn't planned for a rainy day. He wasn't worried about my feelings. He wasn't sorry. He was just inconvenienced. "Your in-laws are not my responsibility," I said calmly. "And frankly, Tyson, neither are you. You are a grown man. If your fridge is empty, go buy groceries." "Oh wait, you cannot. Because you spent your paycheck on leasing a car, you could not afford to impress people who do not care about you." "Dad Jordan is crying," Tyson yelled, pointing at the boy. "You are hurting him. You are hurting him," I corrected. "You brought him out in the snow to use him as a bargaining chip. If you cared about him, you would have taken him to a shelter or a friend's house. Instead, you brought him here to manipulate me. Take him home, Tyson. Put him to bed." "We can't go home," Tyson screamed. "The power is out. You cut the power, didn't you? The house is freezing. I hadn't cut the power yet. That was a lie. Or maybe the utility company had finally caught up with his unpaid bills on his own. Either way, it wasn't my doing, but I didn't correct him. "Figure it out, son," I said. "That is what men do. They figure it out." Tyson stared at the camera. His eyes were full of hate, pure, unadulterated hatred. "You are evil," he spat. "You are a lonely, bitter old miser. I hope you choke on your money." I looked at him for a long moment. I felt a deep sadness, but it was a distant sadness, like looking at an old photograph of someone who had died. The son I loved was gone. This man was a stranger. "I am not evil," I said softly. "I am just closed for business." I picked up my phone. I opened my banking app one last time. I found Tyson's personal checking account. I typed in the amount. $500. Transfer. I pressed the intercom button again. "I just sent you $500, I said. "It is in your account. That is enough to buy buckets of chicken for you, your wife, and her parents. It is enough to get a motel room for the night. Consider it a severance package." "Severance," Tyson shouted. "Yes," I said. "Charity. Take the money. Feed your family." And Tyson, listen to me closely. The eviction notice is real. You have until January 1st to vacate the property. If you are not out by New Year's Day, the sheriff will remove you. "Dad, you can't," Tyson started, but I didn't let him finish. "Merry Christmas, Tyson." I reached out and flipped the master switch for the exterior lights. The porch went dark. The driveway floodlights cut out. The only light left came from the street lamp reflecting off the snow. I watched on the monitor as they stood in the sudden darkness. Tyson kicked the gate one last time. Paige was sobbing into her hands. The car window rolled down and Richard Miller stuck his head out, yelling something I couldn't hear. I turned off the monitor. The screen went black. I walked back to my chair and sat down in the silence. I picked up my rib bone. It was cold now. I took a bite anyway. It tasted like victory. Hard, dry, and necessary victory. Christmas morning usually began with the sound of Nat King Cole on the turntable and the smell of coffee brewing in my Chemex. This year it began with the cold blue light of a PDF file illuminating my face in the darkness of my study. I had hired a private investigator named Marcus, usually reserved for corporate background checks, to look into the Miller family the moment I cut off the money. Marcus did not sleep, and apparently neither did his network, because at 6 in the morning my inbox pinged with a dossier that was thicker than a Bible and full of just as many sins. I sipped my black coffee and scrolled through the financial autopsy of Richard and Linda Miller. It was worse than I thought. It was not just bad luck. It was systemic fraud. The report detailed a Chapter 7 bankruptcy filing from 5 years ago that they had conveniently hidden from public social circles. They had over $300,000 in dischargeable debt, but they still owed the IRS $50,000 in back taxes. They had liens on their previous property in Florida. They were destitute. But the real revelation was the cash flow analysis Marcus had constructed. He had cross-referenced Tyson's spending habits with the Millers' lifestyle. It painted a sickening picture. The expensive dinners, the designer clothes Paige wore, the lease payments on Richard's luxury sedan, even their health insurance premiums. It was all coming from Tyson. And since Tyson's salary was mediocre at best and completely consumed by his own gambling on cryptocurrencies, it meant that for 3 years I had been single-handedly supporting 4 adults. I was not just a father. I was a host organism for a family of parasites. I turned the page to the section labeled Current Living Situation. The Millers did not have a home in Connecticut. They had been evicted from their rental condo 2 months ago. That is why they were at Tyson's house for Christmas. They were not visiting. They had moved in. Paige had cleared out my study, the room I used when I visited, to make a guest room for them. That is why they did not want me there. There was no room for me because the leeches had taken the host's bed. I felt a vain throb in my temple. They had evicted me from my own property to house the people who looked down on me. Then I opened the audio file attached to the email. Marcus noted that this was recorded yesterday evening via a directional microphone pointed at the back patio of the Oakwood house where Linda Miller had stepped out to smoke a cigarette and make a call. I put on my headphones. The audio was grainy but intelligible. Linda's voice was rasping and harsh, stripped of the fake politeness she used in public. She was talking to someone named Brenda. I listened closely. "Yeah, we are stuck here," Linda said, exhaling smoke. The old man cut us off. "Can you believe the spite?" He froze the cards. "We are eating KFC for Christmas dinner, Brenda. It is humiliating. But do not worry, I have a plan. Paige is too soft, but I told her we need to go on the offensive." I leaned in closer, my hand hovering over the volume key. "He is 70 years old, Brenda," Linda continued. "He lives alone. He is angry. We can use that. I told Paige we should file for emergency guardianship. We can claim he is suffering from dementia, that he is paranoid, that he is making irrational financial decisions that endanger his family. If we get a doctor to sign off and we find the right judge, we can get control of his assets. We can freeze him out of his own accounts. He is just a lonely old black man, Brenda. The courts will listen to a concerned young mother trying to protect her inheritance. We just need to paint him as senile and dangerous." I took the headphones off slowly and set them on the desk. The silence in the room was absolute. They were not just ungrateful, they were predatory. Linda Miller was planning to use the legal system to strip me of my agency. She wanted to weaponize my age and my race against me. She wanted to put me in a home or under a conservatorship so she could drain my accounts to pay for her cigarettes and her husband's ascots. She wanted to enslave me with the law. I did not feel anger anymore. Anger is a hot emotion. What I felt was the absolute zero of space. I felt the cold calculation of a man who knows he has the kill shot. They wanted to use the law. Fine. I wrote the law on that family. I picked up my phone and dialed Jonathan Banks. It was 7 in the morning on Christmas Day. I did not care. Lucius Banks answered, his voice thick with sleep. "Please tell me the house didn't burn down." "Not yet," I said. "But I need you to file a lawsuit. Today." Banks sighed. "Lucius, courts are closed. Electronic filing is open 24/7, I countered. "I want you to draft a complaint against Tyson Coleman. The charge is misappropriation of funds and breach of fiduciary duty." Banks paused. "Fiduciary duty. Lucius, he is your son, not your employee." "Wrong," I said. I pulled a document from my safe. 5 years ago, when I set up the trust that pays for his lifestyle, I made him the trustee of a sub-account. The bylaws clearly state that the funds are to be used strictly for the maintenance of the primary residence and the education of his issue. That means Jordan. I looked at the PI report again. I have evidence, Banks. I have proof that he used trust funds to pay off Richard Miller's IRS tax lien. That is $50,000 of misappropriated funds. That is a felony-level theft disguised as a family loan. He violated the trust indenture. Banks was wide awake now. If we file that Lucius, we are essentially accusing him of embezzlement. This opens him up to criminal liability, not just civil. "I know," I said. "I want it filed, and I want a motion for an emergency accounting of all funds. I want his personal assets frozen until the audit is complete. And Jonathan, I want it served today." "On Christmas," Banks asked. "They are planning to have me declared incompetent, Jonathan," I said, my voice low. "They are plotting to take my freedom. I am striking first. Call the process server. I will pay double the holiday rate. Get it to the house by noon." I hung up. I looked at the photo of Tyson on my desk from his graduation. He looked so proud then. I wondered when he had become this weak man who let his mother-in-law plot against his own father. It didn't matter. He had made his choice. Now he had to live with the consequences. 5 hours later, the scene at 442 Oakwood Drive was grim. The heating had been cut hours ago, so the house was sitting at a chilly 50 degrees. Tyson, Paige, Richard, and Linda were gathered around the kitchen island wearing their winter coats indoors. In the center of the island sat the buckets of fried chicken they had bought with my $500. It was a pathetic feast. The grease stains on the cardboard buckets were the only decoration. Jordan was crying in the living room, bundled in blankets, watching a cartoon on a tablet that was running out of battery because the outlets were dead. The mood was toxic. Linda was complaining about the cold. Richard was complaining about the quality of the wine they had managed to buy from a gas station. Paige was staring at the wall, her eyes red and puffy. Tyson was trying to eat a drumstick, but he looked like he was chewing on glass. Then the doorbell rang. They all froze. Hope flickered in Tyson's eyes. Maybe it was me. Maybe I had come to my senses. Maybe I was bringing the power back and the Porsche and the money. "I will get it," Tyson said, jumping up. He ran to the door. He threw it open. He did not see his father. He saw a large man in a thick parka holding a manila envelope. "Tyson Coleman," the man asked. "Yes?" Tyson said, confused. "Merry Christmas," the man said. "You have been served." He thrust the envelope into Tyson's chest and turned, walking away down the snowy path. Tyson stood there for a moment, the cold wind blowing into the hallway. He opened the envelope. He pulled out the thick stack of legal documents. His eyes scanned the cover page. Superior Court, Plaintiff Lucius Coleman. Defendant Tyson Coleman. Cause of action, civil theft, misappropriation of trust assets, breach of fiduciary duty, demand for damages, $1.5 million. Tyson dropped the papers. They scattered on the floor like dead leaves. He fell to his knees. The sound he made was not a word. It was a guttural moan of absolute defeat. Paige ran into the hallway. "What is it, Tyson? Is it your dad?" Tyson looked up at her, his eyes empty. "He is suing me, Paige. He is suing me for everything. He knows about the money I gave your parents. He knows everything." Linda walked in, holding a chicken wing. "Sue him back," she said, her mouth full. "Counter-sue the bastard." Tyson looked at his mother-in-law, and for the first time he saw her clearly. He saw the greed. He saw the rot. "Shut up," he whispered. "Just shut up. We are going to jail." The wind howled through the open door, blowing snow onto the legal papers. The cold was finally inside. The audacity of desperation is a fascinating thing to witness. Most people, when served with a lawsuit for embezzlement and facing eviction, would retreat. They would pack boxes. They would call a lawyer. Paige Coleman, however, decided to throw a party. It was 7 p.m. on Christmas Day. The heat was still off, but they had lit a fire in the living room hearth and scattered candles everywhere to create what she probably called ambiance, but what was actually survival. I sat in my car down the street watching the guests arrive. There were about 20 of them. Friends from Paige's yoga studio, Tyson's old college buddies, people they were trying to impress, or more likely people they were hoping to borrow money from. I saw Paige greeting them at the door, wearing a fur coat over her cocktail dress, laughing a little too loudly. She was playing the hostess on the deck of the Titanic. I checked my watch. 7:15, right on schedule. I stepped out of my truck. I was not alone. Flanking me were 2 men in dark suits carrying clipboards and rolls of neon orange stickers. They were asset recovery specialist contractors I used when a commercial tenant defaulted and tried to strip the fixtures. Tonight they were my reapers. We walked up the driveway. The snow crunched under our boots. I could hear the music thumping from inside. It was a festive playlist masking the sound of a life collapsing. I did not knock. I used my key, the one Tyson thought he had changed, but which was part of a master key system I installed when I bought the property. The door swung open. The heat from the fireplace hit me along with the smell of cheap wine and desperation. The conversation in the living room died instantly. 20 heads turned. Paige froze mid-laugh, her glass raised in a toast. Tyson, who was pouring drinks in the corner, dropped the bottle. It shattered on the hardwood floor, a sharp crash that echoed in the silence. "Good evening," I said, my voice booming. I did not yell. I projected. It was the voice I used to clear a warehouse floor. "Please do not let me interrupt your festivities. I am just here to conduct an inventory." Before anyone could react, I nodded to my men. They moved with efficient brutality. They walked into the living room, ignoring the guests, and began their work. They did not speak. They simply approached the furniture, the electronics, the art on the walls, and slapped a bright orange sticker on each item. Property of Coleman Holdings LLC. Do not remove. One man tagged the 80-inch television while a guest was still watching the football game. Another tagged the leather sectional sofa right next to where Linda Miller was sitting, forcing her to scoot away in alarm. I walked to the mantel and placed a sticker on the expensive abstract painting Paige had bought with my money. "What are you doing?" Paige shrieked, rushing toward me. Get out of my house. You cannot do this. We have guests." I turned to her. "This is not your house, Paige," I said calmly. "And this is not your art. This is collateral. And since your husband is currently being sued for misappropriating the funds used to purchase these items, I am securing my assets before you try to sell them on Facebook Marketplace." The guests began to murmur. I saw phones coming out. They were recording. This was the social death Paige feared more than actual poverty. Richard Miller, Paige's father, pushed his way through the crowd. He was red-faced and swaying slightly, smelling of the cheap brandy he had been nursing all day. He had found his courage in a bottle. "Now listen here, you son of a bitch," he slurred, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You cannot just barge in here and terrorize my daughter. I know my rights. This is trespassing. Get out before I throw you out." He lunged at me. It was a clumsy, sloppy attempt at a punch. I did not even flinch. One of my asset recovery men, a former linebacker named Tiny, stepped in front of me. He caught Richard's fist in his open palm like he was catching a baseball. He twisted slightly, and Richard let out a yelp of pain, dropping to his knees. Tiny looked at me for instruction. I shook my head. "Let him go." Tiny released him. Richard scrambled back, rubbing his wrist, breathing hard. He looked up at me with pure venom. "I am going to sue you," he spat. "I am going to take everything you have." I walked over to him. I leaned down until my face was inches from his. I lowered my voice so only he could hear. It was a whisper of absolute destruction. "You are going to sue me, Richard?" I asked. "Like you sued the insurance company in Florida in 2018. The arson case, the one where the warehouse burned down 3 days after you increased the policy." Richard went rigid. His eyes bulged. All the color drained from his face, leaving him looking like wet dough. "I know about the settlement, Richard," I continued. "I know you paid off the investigator to call it inconclusive. And I know the statute of limitations for insurance fraud hasn't expired yet. Do you really want to bring the law into this? Because I have the file on my phone. One click and it goes to the FBI field office in Miami." Richard Miller opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at his wife. He looked at his daughter. Then he looked at the floor. He backed away from me, stumbling over his own feet, retreating into the shadows of the kitchen. He was neutralized. I stood up and faced the room. The silence was absolute. Even the music had been turned off. Tyson was standing by the broken wine bottle looking like a ghost. Paige was sobbing quietly. The guests looked terrified. I walked over to the karaoke machine Paige had set up. I picked up the microphone. I tapped it twice. Thump, thump. The sound echoed through the house. "Attention, everyone," I said, my voice amplified, filling every corner of the room. "The party is over. The individuals hosting you tonight are currently under investigation for civil theft and fraud. The food you're eating was paid for with stolen funds. The chairs you are sitting on are property of the bank." I paused, looking around the room, meeting the eyes of the guests. "If you remain on the premises after 5 minutes, you will be considered accomplices to trespassing and unlawful occupation. The police are on their way to secure the property. I suggest you leave. Now." It was a stampede. There were no goodbyes, no thank yous. Coats were grabbed. Purses were snatched. People practically ran for the door, desperate to distance themselves from the stench of scandal. Within 2 minutes, the house was empty except for the family. The front door stood open, letting the freezing wind blow in, extinguishing the candles one by one. I put the microphone down. I looked at Tyson. He was sitting on the floor, surrounded by broken glass and orange stickers. He didn't look at me. He just stared at the wall, broken. I nodded to my men. "We are done here." We walked out into the cold night, leaving them in the ruins of their vanity. The house was tagged. The guests were gone. The reputation was destroyed. Merry Christmas. The morning of December 26th broke with a gray sky that promised more snow. I sat at my kitchen table with a fresh pot of coffee and a list of phone numbers. Most people spend the day after Christmas relaxing or returning gifts. I was spending it returning my life to its factory settings. I looked at the utility bills for the Oakwood Drive house. They were spread out on the table in front of me. Electric, gas, water, internet. Every single one of them was in my name. When I bought the house, I set up the utilities to ensure they would be turned on before Tyson moved in. Tyson, being Tyson, never bothered to transfer them into his name. He just enjoyed the light and the heat and the high-speed Wi-Fi without ever wondering where it came from. For 3 years, I had been the invisible engine keeping his world running. Today, I was turning the engine off. I picked up the phone and dialed the power company first. I navigated the automated menu until I reached a human representative. "Good morning," I said, my voice crisp and professional. "I am the account holder for the property at 442 Oakwood Drive. The property is being vacated. I would like to request an immediate termination of service." The representative hesitated. "Sir, it is the middle of winter. We usually recommend keeping the heat on to prevent the pipes from freezing." "I am aware of the risks," I said. "I am the owner of the property. I am authorizing the shutoff. Turn it off. Today." I repeated the process with the gas company, then the water department, then the cable provider. It took me less than an hour. By 10 in the morning, I had systematically severed every lifeline that connected that house to the modern world. I was not doing this to be cruel. I was doing this because a tenant who sues his landlord does not get to enjoy radiant floor heating. I was doing this because they needed to understand that civilization costs money and they had none. I imagined the scene as the invisible current stopped flowing, the hum of the refrigerator dying, the pilot light in the furnace winking out, the router in the hallway going dark. It was a silent catastrophe. It was the sound of reality crashing into their fantasy. I poured myself another cup of coffee. My house was warm. My lights were on. I had paid my bills. By noon, the temperature inside the Oakwood house had begun to equalize with the temperature outside. It was 20 degrees Fahrenheit. The insulation I had paid for was good, but it could not hold back the winter forever without a heat source. I checked the security cameras one last time before the internet cut out. I saw them huddled in the living room, wrapped in every blanket they could find. Then the screen went black. Connection lost. I did not need a camera to know what was happening inside. I knew the physics of a freezing house, and I knew the psychology of a fracturing family. The chaos began in the master bathroom. Paige had tried to take a hot shower to wash away the stress of the lawsuit and the humiliation of the party. She turned the handle. For a moment, there might have been some residual warm water in the tank, but it would have run cold within seconds. I imagined her scream echoing off the marble tiles I had paid for. She would wrap herself in a towel, shivering, her wet hair turning into icicles. She would run into the bedroom expecting the heat to be blasting, but the vents were blowing nothing but stagnant cold air. She would storm downstairs to scream at Tyson. "Tyson, fix the heat. Tyson, fix the water. Tyson, why is the internet down? I cannot check my notifications." Tyson would be frantic, running to the thermostat, checking the breaker box, trying to restart the router. He would see the screens were blank. He would see the pilot light was out. He would realize that this wasn't a malfunction. It was an eviction. In the kitchen, Richard and Linda Miller would be losing their minds. Richard would be complaining that he couldn't brew his tea. Linda would be whining that her electric blanket wasn't working. They would turn on Tyson like a pack of wolves. "You are useless," Richard would shout, his breath visible in the freezing air. "You cannot even keep the lights on. What kind of man are you? We are freezing to death in a mansion. You promised us a life of luxury, and you have given us a refugee camp." Tyson would try to defend himself. "It is my father," he would stammer, his teeth chattering. He cut it off. "He controls the accounts." "Then pay the bill yourself, you idiot," Linda would screech. "Call them. Put it in your name." "I cannot." Tyson would yell back. "I have no money." He froze my accounts. "I cannot put down a deposit. I cannot do anything." The house would be filled with the sounds of their accusations. They were trapped in a beautiful icebox. The expensive art on the walls, the designer furniture, the high ceilings, none of it mattered now. You cannot eat a painting, you cannot burn a leather sofa efficiently. They were discovering the hierarchy of needs, and they were stuck at the very bottom. And in the middle of it all was Jordan, my 5-year-old grandson. He didn't care about lawsuits or trusts or pride. He just knew that his toes hurt. He knew that his tablet wouldn't turn on. He knew that his parents were screaming at each other and that his grandparents were looking at his father with disgust. He was crying, a low, miserable wail that no one was attending to because they were too busy fighting over who was to blame for the cold. At 2 in the afternoon, my phone rang. It was Tyson. I looked at the caller ID. I let it ring. I wanted him to wait. I wanted him to feel the cold settle into his bones. It stopped ringing. Then it rang again immediately. I picked up. What I said, "Dad." Tyson's voice was unrecognizable. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't demanding. He was shaking. I could hear the tremor in his jaw. "Dad, please." "It is 40 degrees in the house. We can see our breath. The water is off. The toilets won't flush." "That is what happens when you don't pay the bills, Tyson," I said calmly. "Dad, we are freezing," Tyson said, and then his voice broke. He started to sob. Not the angry tears of a man who lost his car, but the terrified tears of a man who cannot protect his child. "Jordan is crying, Dad. His lips are blue. He is huddled under 3 blankets and he won't stop shivering. I do not care about me. I do not care about Paige. But Jordan is suffering. Please, Dad. He is just a little boy." I closed my eyes. The image of my grandson shivering in the dark cut through my resolve. I was a businessman. I was a hard man, but I was not a monster. I had made my point. The adults had been punished. The child had suffered enough collateral damage. "Is he there with you?" I asked. "Yes," Tyson sniffled. "He is right here." "Bring him to me," I said. What Tyson asked confused. "Bring Jordan to my house," I said. "Pack a bag for him. Bring his toys. Bring his warm clothes. Drive him over here right now. I have heat. I have hot water. I have food." "Okay," Tyson said, relief flooding his voice. "Okay, we are coming. We will pack our things and be there in 20 minutes. Thank you, Dad. Thank you." "Stop," I said, my voice like a whip crack. "Not we, Tyson. Him. Just Jordan." There was a silence on the line. The wind howled in the background. "What?" Tyson whispered. "You are not welcome in my house," I said. "Neither is your wife. And certainly not her parasites. You made your bed, Tyson, now you can freeze in it. But I will not let my grandson suffer for your incompetence. Bring the boy. Drop him off at the gate. Then leave." "But Dad," Tyson pleaded, "we will die out here. It is going to be 10 degrees tonight. Then go to a shelter," I said. "Go to a church. Go to hell for all I care. But you are not coming inside my home. You sued me, Tyson. You tried to steal from me. You do not get to warm your hands at my fire. Now, do you want Jordan to be warm, or do you want to use him as a human shield again? Make a choice." Tyson breathed a jagged breath. I could hear Paige screaming in the background, asking what I said. I could hear Richard yelling about his rights. "I will bring him," Tyson said softly. "I will bring him right now." "Good," I said. "The gate will be open for the boy. Only the boy." I hung up. I went to the thermostat and turned the heat up 2 degrees. I went to the kitchen and put a kettle on for hot chocolate. I was ready to be a grandfather, but I was done being a father to a snake. The morning of December 27th brought a thaw in the weather, but a deep freeze in my legal situation. I was sitting in the library of my home reading a book on Stoic philosophy when the doorbell rang. It was not a friend, it was a process server. He handed me a thick packet of documents with a smirk that suggested he knew exactly what was inside. I closed the door and walked to my desk. I did not need to read the first page to know what it was, but I read it anyway. Superior Court of Connecticut, Family Division, Plaintiff Paige Coleman, Defendant Lucius Coleman, Nature of Action, Constructive Trust and Equitable Distribution of Marital Assets. I laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound that echoed in the empty room. Paige had done the unthinkable. She had hired a lawyer, not a good lawyer. I recognized the name on the letterhead. Barry Scheckler. He was a strip mall attorney whose face was plastered on billboards next to the highway, usually advertising services for slip and fall accidents or DUIs. He was cheap, he was aggressive, and he was clearly desperate for a payday. Paige was suing me for ownership of the house. Her argument was laughable but audacious. She claimed that because she had chosen the paint colors, because she had hosted parties, and because she had treated the house as her primary residence, she had developed an equitable interest in the property. She argued that the house was a gift to the couple and that my attempt to foreclose was a vindictive act of alienation. She wanted a judge to grant her title to the home. She wanted the court to give her the asset I had paid $1.2 million for, simply because she had lived in it for 3 years. I picked up the phone and called Jonathan Banks. "Did you see it?" I asked. "I am reading it now." Banks said, his voice dripping with disdain. "It is a frivolous motion, Lucius. It has no legal standing. The deed is in the LLC's name. There is no written contract promising them the house. It will get thrown out." "I know it will," I said. "But she is trying to stall." She wants to tie this up in court so she can stay in the house while the litigation drags on. She wants to force a settlement. She thinks I will pay her to go away." "She is wrong," Banks said. "Set up a meeting," I said. "Today. Call Mr. Sheckler. Tell him we want to discuss a settlement. Tell him to bring his clients to your office at 2:00. "You want to settle?" Banks asked, surprised. "No," I said. "I want to end it. I want them in a room, Jonathan. I want to look them in the eye when the guillotine drops." At 1:55, I walked into the conference room at Banks & Associates. It was a room designed to intimidate. The table was a 20-foot slab of polished mahogany. The view from the floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city skyline. I sat at the head of the table. Banks sat to my right. On the table in front of us sat 3 neat stacks of files. At 2:00, the door opened. Paige walked in first. She was wearing a black dress and dark sunglasses, trying to look like a grieving widow or a celebrity in court. Tyson followed her. He looked terrible. He had not shaved in 3 days. He wore a wrinkled hoodie and jeans. He would not look at me. Behind them came Barry Sheckler. He was a short man in an ill-fitting suit carrying a briefcase that looked like it was made of synthetic leather. They sat down. Sheckler cleared his throat and opened his briefcase, shuffling papers around to look busy. "Gentlemen," Sheckler began, his voice oily, "I am glad you agreed to meet. My client, Mrs. Coleman, has suffered significant emotional distress due to your aggressive tactics. We believe a settlement is in the best interest of all parties. We are willing to drop the lawsuit in exchange for the deed to the Oakwood property and a cash settlement of $200,000 for pain and suffering." I stared at him. I did not blink. I looked at Paige. She had her chin raised, defiant. She really believed she deserved this. She believed she was entitled to my life's work. Banks leaned forward. He did not look at Sheckler. He looked at Tyson. "Tyson," Banks said softly, "do you know where the money for the house came from?" Tyson looked up, his eyes red. "From my dad." Banks opened the first file. "Not exactly. The money came from the Coleman Family Trust, specifically from the Principal Capital account. Your father is the grantor and the sole trustee. The bylaws of the trust state that any distribution of real estate assets must be for the sole benefit of the beneficiaries. You are a beneficiary, Tyson." "But Paige is not," Sheckler interrupted. "That is a technicality. They are married. What is his is hers." Banks ignored him. He slid a document across the table. It was a bank transfer receipt from 3 years ago. "This is the wire transfer for the purchase of the house," Banks said. $1.2 million. Direct from Lucius Coleman's private equity account. Tyson did not contribute 1 cent. Not for the down payment, not for the closing costs, not for the insurance. There is no marital asset because the marriage never paid for it. It is a corporate asset owned by a company you have no shares in. Paige slammed her hand on the table. "That house was a gift. He gave it to us. He called it our house. I spoke for the first time. I called it your house, Paige, because I wanted you to feel at home. I did not give it to you. I let you borrow it. And just like a library book, when you abuse it, you have to return it." Sheckler tried to regain control. "We have witnesses who will testify that it was intended as a gift. We will go to trial. It could take years." "Go ahead," I said. "But before you do, you might want to look at the second file." Banks slid the second file across the table. It was thinner, but much more dangerous. He opened it to reveal a photocopy of a withdrawal slip. "Last month," Banks said, "on November 15th, a withdrawal was made from Mr. Coleman's private retirement pension fund. The amount was $20,000. The signature at the bottom reads, Lucius Coleman." I looked at Paige. She went rigid. Banks continued. "However, Mr. Coleman was in New York that day meeting with investors. He could not have signed this check." We pulled the security footage from the bank branch where the check was cashed. Banks pulled out a photograph. It was a grainy black and white still from a security camera. It showed a woman standing at the teller window. She was wearing sunglasses, but her face was clearly visible. It was Paige. "This is felony forgery and grand larceny," Banks said, his voice like a hammer. "You forged your father-in-law's signature to steal $20,000 from a federally protected retirement account. That carries a mandatory prison sentence, Paige. Minimum 5 years. Paige began to shake. Sheckler looked at the photo, then at his client. He closed his folder. "Mrs. Coleman, is this true?" Sheckler asked, his voice losing all its bluster. She did not answer. She just stared at the photo. Tyson looked at the photo. He picked it up. His hands were trembling. "You stole from him," Tyson whispered. "You told me that money came from your modeling gig. You told me you booked a campaign. You stole it." "I needed it," Paige hissed, turning on him. "For my parents. They needed to pay off a loan shark." "You were broke, Tyson." "What was I supposed to do?" Banks interjected. "We have already drafted the criminal complaint. We can file it with the district attorney this afternoon. Or you can drop your lawsuit, vacate the house immediately, and sign a full release of all claims." Scheckler stood up. "I cannot be a party to this. If there is criminal liability involved, I am out. I am withdrawing as counsel." He grabbed his briefcase and walked out of the room without looking back. Paige was left alone, exposed and defenseless. But I was not done. I had one more file. The third file. The one that would ensure she never bothered my son again. "There is one more thing," I said. Paige looked at me, her eyes filled with terror. "What more do you want?" "You won." "I will sign." "I want to talk about your parents," I said. "Richard and Linda Miller." Paige frowned. "What about them?" "They are broke. You know that." "I know they are broke," I said. "But I also know they are not Americans." Banks opened the third file. It contained copies of passports, British passports. "Your parents came here on tourist visas 10 years ago," Banks said, reading from the file. "They overstayed. They have been living here illegally for a decade, working under the table and avoiding the system." I leaned forward. 2 years ago, when they went bankrupt and I bailed them out, I also did something else. I signed an affidavit of support, Form I-864. I sponsored them for a green card adjustment. I guaranteed the government that they would not become a public charge. Paige's eyes went wide. "You sponsored them." "I did," I said. "Because Tyson asked me to. Because he said they were family." But here is the thing about sponsorship, Paige. It is voluntary. And it can be withdrawn if the sponsor believes the applicants are engaging in fraud. I pulled a letter from the file. It was addressed to the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. "This is a formal withdrawal of my sponsorship," I said. "It also includes a report detailing their bankruptcy fraud and their tax evasion. Once I send this, your parents lose their status protection. They will be placed in removal proceedings. They will be deported, Paige. Back to Leeds with nothing but the clothes on their backs." Paige made a sound like a wounded animal. "No, you can't. My mother is sick. They have nothing in England. You would destroy them." "They destroyed themselves," I said. "They raised a thief. They leached off my son. They plotted to put me in a home. I am just filing the paperwork." Tyson looked at me. "Dad," he said, his voice quiet. "Are you really going to deport them?" I looked at my son. I saw the conflict in his eyes. He hated them, but he was shocked by the brutality of my move. "That depends on her," I said, pointing at Paige. I pushed a document toward her. It was a confession, a full admission of the forgery and the theft. "Sign this," I said. "Sign the confession. Admit to the theft. Agree to repay the $20,000. Agree to a full annulment of the marriage based on fraud. And agree to leave the state. If you do that, I will hold on to the immigration letter. I won't send it yet. But if you ever come near Tyson or Jordan again, if you ever try to sue me again, I will mail it. And I will hand this confession to the police." Paige looked at the paper. She looked at Tyson. He was not looking at her. He was looking at his hands. He was done. She picked up the pen. Her hand shook so hard she could barely write. She signed her name. "It is over," I said. Banks took the papers. "Get out," he said to Paige. She stood up. She looked small. She looked broken. She walked out of the room, leaving her husband and her future behind. Tyson sat there alone at the massive table. The room was silent. I stood up and walked over to the window. I looked out at the city. It was a cold, hard world out there, but in here it was finally clean. The temperature inside the house on Oakwood Drive had dropped to 38 degrees, but the heat coming from the kitchen was enough to burn the place down. I had driven over to the property to oversee the final eviction protocol, but I found myself standing in the darkened hallway, listening to the sound of rats eating each other. Tyson had returned from the meeting at the law firm looking like a man who had walked through a minefield. Paige followed him, her mascara streaked down her face, her signature on the confession letter burning a hole in her conscience. Inside the kitchen, Richard and Linda Miller were huddled around a single camping lantern Richard had found in the basement. They were wearing every coat they owned. When they saw Paige enter without a check, without a settlement, and without a victory, the facade of family unity disintegrated instantly. "You signed it," Richard screamed, his voice echoing off the freezing granite countertops. "You signed a confession. Are you stupid, girl? You just gave him everything he needed to deport us. We trusted you to fix this. We trusted you to handle the old man." "I handled him," Paige shrieked back, her voice cracking with hysteria. "I kept us afloat for 3 years, Dad. I stole for you. I lied for you. And what did you do? You drank wine and complained about the temperature while I committed felonies. You pushed me to do this. You said he wouldn't notice. You said he was senile. He is senile." Linda spat, pulling a blanket tighter around her shoulders. "You just have no backbone. You let him intimidate you. You should have cried harder. You should have threatened to hurt yourself. Men always cave when you get dramatic. You are useless, Paige. We raised you to marry money, and you picked a man whose daddy holds the leash." Tyson stood by the kitchen island, his head bowed. He was listening to every word. For years he had defended these people. He had told me they were sophisticated. He had told me they were misunderstood. Now he was hearing the raw, unvarnished truth. They were not family. They were investors, and Paige was a failed asset. Linda turned her venom on Tyson. "And you," she hissed, "you are pathetic. You call yourself a man. You let your father freeze your wife and her parents. You let him take the car. You let him humiliate us. You should have punched him. You should have broken into his house and taken what belongs to us." Tyson looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed and dead. "Nothing belongs to us, Linda," he whispered. "Nothing. The house, the cars, the food, It was all him." "Oh, shut up," Richard groaned. "Stop whining. Go fix this. Go beg him. Get on your knees if you have to. We need money, Tyson. We need to leave the country before immigration comes knocking. Get us cash." Tyson looked at Richard. He looked at Linda, shivering in her greed. He looked at Paige, who was looking at her parents with hatred, not for using her, but for calling her useless. The realization hit Tyson like a physical blow. I could see his posture change in the shadows. His shoulders squared, his hands curled into fists. He had been a host to a parasite for so long he had forgotten what it felt like to have his own blood. "No," Tyson said. "What did you say?" Richard asked, stepping forward aggressively. "I said no," Tyson repeated louder this time. "I am not begging him. I am done begging. And I am done with you." He moved with a sudden violent energy that startled everyone. He grabbed the nearest suitcase, which belonged to Linda. It was a Louis Vuitton bag I had unknowingly paid for. Tyson dragged it to the back door. "What are you doing?" Linda shrieked, jumping up. "I am taking out the trash," Tyson roared. He threw the door open. The winter wind blasted into the kitchen, swirling the snow across the floor. Tyson heaved the suitcase out into the darkness. It landed in a snowbank with a dull thud. He grabbed Richard's duffel bag next. Richard tried to grab his arm, but Tyson shoved him back with a force born of 3 years of suppressed rage. "Get out," Tyson screamed. "Get out of this house. Get out of my life." "You can't do this," Richard yelled, stumbling back. "It is freezing. We have rights. You have nothing," Tyson bellowed, throwing the second bag. "You are leeches. You ruined my marriage. You ruined my relationship with my father. You made me a thief. Get out before I kill you." The raw violence in his voice terrified them. Richard and Linda scrambled for the door, grabbing their coats, terrified of the man they had spent years emasculating. They ran out into the snow, cursing and slipping as they chased their luggage in the dark. Tyson slammed the door and locked it. He leaned his forehead against the cold wood, breathing like a sprinter. The kitchen was silent except for the wind howling outside. Paige stood by the island alone. She looked at Tyson's back. She did not look sorry. She looked calculating. She was running the numbers in her head, realizing her parents were a lost cause and she needed a new survival strategy. "Tyson," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Baby, listen to me. They are gone. It is just us now. We can fix this. Your dad, he is angry, but he won't let us starve. We can blame it all on them. We can say they forced us." Tyson turned around slowly. He looked at his wife. The woman he had worshipped. The woman he had stolen for. "You forged his signature page," he said, his voice flat. "You stole from his retirement." "I did it for us," she pleaded, reaching for his hand. "No," Tyson said, pulling away. You did it for yourself. You did it because you wanted to look rich. You did it because you are exactly like them." Paige's face hardened. The mask of the victim fell away, replaced by the cold steel of the narcissist. "Fine," she spat. "If that is how you want to play it, fine. I want a divorce," Good Tyson said. "I want one too." "I want half," Paige said, crossing her arms. "I want half of everything, Tyson. The furniture, the electronics, whatever is left in the bank accounts. I want alimony. I want child support for a child we don't even have yet, but I will sue you for emotional distress until I get it. This marriage was a contract, Tyson, and you are in breach. I know your dad has money. I know he set up trusts for you. I am not leaving here empty-handed. I will burn your reputation to the ground. I will tell everyone you abused me. I will tell everyone you forced me to sign that confession. I want a settlement, Tyson. I want $1.2 million, or I go to the press." Tyson laughed. It was a sound of pure hysteria. Half, he choked out. "You want half? Paige, look around you. Look at this house. Look at the orange stickers on the walls." "I do not care," Paige screamed. "I know what you are worth on paper. Your father is rich. That makes you rich. I want my share." That was my cue. I stepped out from the darkened hallway into the dim light of the kitchen lantern. The sound of my boots on the hardwood floor made Paige jump and spin around. She gasped, clutching her chest. "You," I said, my voice filling the empty room. "You want half, Paige? Let us talk about half." "Lucius," she stammered, backing away until she hit the counter. I didn't know you were here." "I am always here, Paige," I said, walking closer. "I own the building. Now, you said you want to divide the marital assets. As the primary lien holder on this estate, I think I can help with the math." I pulled a ledger from my coat pocket. "Asset number 1, I said. The house. Market value, $1.2 million. Mortgage debt, $1.2 million plus $50,000 in late fees and legal penalties. Equity 0. I turned the page. Asset number 2. The vehicles. Repossessed. Equity 0. Asset number 3. The bank accounts. Currently overdrawn by $4,000 due to legal fees." I looked at her. Her eyes were wide with fear. "So, Paige," I continued, "if you want half of the marital estate, you are entitled to exactly half of the debt. You owe me $600,000 for the house. You owe the bank $2,000 for the overdraft. And you owe the state a few years of your life for the forgery. Which part of that would you like to take with you tonight?" Paige looked at me, then she looked at Tyson. Tyson was not looking at her. He was looking at the floor, ashamed but resolute. "There is no trust fund, Paige," I said, delivering the final blow. "There is no inheritance, not for you. The trust was dissolved this morning due to criminal misconduct by the beneficiary. Tyson has nothing. You picked the carcass clean and now there is no meat left on the bone." Paige stared at me. Her mouth opened and closed. The calculation in her eyes died, replaced by the terrifying realization of absolute poverty. "You are lying," she whispered. "You are hiding money." "I am protecting money," I corrected. "My money. Money you will never touch again. Now get out." I pointed to the door. Paige looked around the freezing kitchen one last time. She looked at the luxury refrigerator that was warm inside. She looked at the granite island where she had staged her Instagram photos. She looked at the life she had pretended to have. Then she looked at Tyson. "You are a loser," she hissed at him. "You were always a loser. I should have married the banker." Tyson did not flinch. "Go, Paige," he said softly. "Just go." Paige grabbed her purse. She didn't have a coat. She didn't have a suitcase. She had nothing but the clothes on her back and a phone with no service. She walked to the back door. She opened it and the wind hit her, making her stagger. She looked back at us one last time, her face twisted in a mask of hate. "I hope you both rot in hell," she screamed. Then she stepped out into the snow and the darkness swallowed her whole. Tyson walked over and closed the door. He locked it. He leaned his back against it and slid down until he was sitting on the floor, his knees pulled up to his chest. He put his head in his hands and began to weep. It was the sound of a man who had lost everything and found himself. I stood there for a moment watching him. I did not comfort him. Not yet. He needed to feel this. He needed to feel the weight of his freedom. The house was silent. The rats were gone. The cold remained, but for the first time in 3 years, the air was clean. The morning of New Year's Eve arrived with a sky the color of bruised iron. It was the last day of the year and the last day of Tyson's life as a fake aristocrat. I drove to the house at 10 in the morning. The streets were quiet, the holiday decorations looking tired and bleak against the dirty snow. The driveway at 442 Oakwood Drive was empty. The Porsche was gone. The rental car was gone. The movers I had hired 2 days prior had done their job with surgical precision. The 80-inch television was gone. The leather sectional sofas were sitting in a storage unit in New Jersey. The expensive art was wrapped in bubble wrap and tagged as collateral. All that was left was the structure itself, the hollow shell of a dream Tyson had never paid for. I walked up the path. The front door was unlocked. I stepped inside. The house was freezing, the air stagnant and heavy. I walked into the living room. It was empty save for a single figure sitting in the center of the hardwood floor. Tyson was sitting cross-legged, wearing his winter coat, a beanie pulled low over his ears. He was shivering slightly, but he was not looking at his phone. He was not pacing. He was just sitting there staring at the empty space on the wall where the abstract painting used to hang. He looked smaller than I remembered. He looked like he had aged 10 years and 7 days. He heard the heavy thud of my boots on the floor, but he did not look up. He did not jump. He just sat there waiting for the sheriff to come and drag him out. He was waiting for the end of the world. I stopped 10 feet away from him, maintaining the distance between a judge and a defendant. I did not speak. I let the silence stretch out, forcing him to acknowledge my presence on his own terms. Tyson took a deep breath. It rattled in his chest. "You are early," he said, his voice raspy and dry. The eviction notice said I had until noon. "I haven't finished sweeping the kitchen yet." I checked my watch. "It is 10:15. I said, my voice echoing in the empty room. "I came to inspect the property before the final handover. I want to make sure there is no further damage to the asset." Tyson nodded slowly. "It is clean," he said. "I patched the holes in the garage wall where the gym mirrors were. I used some spackle I found in the basement. It is not perfect, but I tried, Dad. I tried to leave it better than I found it." He finally looked up at me. His eyes were red-rimmed and sunken, but they were clear. The arrogance was gone. The entitlement was gone. What was left was a man who had been stripped down to the studs. "I am sorry," he whispered. "I know it does not fix anything. I know I cannot pay you back the money I wasted, but I am sorry. Not for the house, not for the car. I am sorry for disrespecting you. I am sorry for letting them treat you like a servant in your own investment. I was weak, Dad. I wanted them to like me so much that I forgot who actually loved me. I traded my father for a fan club that hated me." I stood silent, letting him speak. He wiped his nose with his sleeve, a gesture so unlike the polished executive he pretended to be. "I signed the divorce papers," he continued, his voice breaking. "Paige is gone. She took the jewelry you didn't tag. She took whatever cash was in the jar. But she left Jordan. She said he was baggage. She said a crying kid would ruin her chances of finding a new guy." He paused, choking back a sob. He looked at me with desperate, pleading eyes. "Dad, I have a favor to ask. The last one, I promise." "Not for me. I am going to a men's shelter tonight. I have the address. I will figure it out. But Jordan, can you take him? Can you keep him until I get on my feet? I do not want him sleeping on a cot in a gymnasium. He is scared, Dad. He loves you. He needs his grandfather. Please, just take the boy. Punish me. Let me freeze, but save him." I looked at my son. He was offering me his child and asking for nothing for himself. He was willing to be homeless to protect his son. He was finally acting like a father. He was finally acting like a man. The anger that had fueled me for a week began to cool, replaced by a hard resolve. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment the boy died and the man was born. I reached into the inside pocket of my wool coat. Tyson flinched instinctively, expecting a restraining order or a bill for the damages. I pulled out a single sheet of stiff paper and held it out to him. "Take it," I said. Tyson looked at the paper, then at me. He reached out with a trembling hand and took it. He squinted at the text in the dim light. "Employment contract," he read aloud, his brow furrowing. "Employer Coleman Logistics, formerly Apex Marketing." He looked up at me confused. "Apex," he said. "That is my company. That is where I work. We are going bankrupt, Dad. We missed payroll last week. The CEO is missing. Not anymore, I said. I bought the debt this morning, Tyson. I acquired the controlling interest at 9 a.m. I fired the board of directors an hour ago. They were incompetent, just like their marketing director. Tyson stared at me, his mouth opening and closing. You bought the company. You own Apex. I own everything, Tyson, I said. I own the debt. I own the building. And I own the payroll. You are fired from the marketing department, Tyson, I said, my voice cutting through his shock. You are not qualified to lead a team. You cannot even lead your own household. But you are rehired effective immediately as a level 1 inventory associate in the warehouse. Tyson looked at the paper again. You start tomorrow at 6 a.m., I said. You will report to the foreman, you will load trucks, you will sweep floors, you will take inventory. The pay is $15 an hour. You will clock in and you will clock out. There are no bonuses. There is no commission. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a key, a simple brass key. I have rented a 2-bedroom apartment on 4th Street, I said, tossing the key onto the floor in front of him. It is clean, it is safe, but it is not free. You will pay me rent every month from your paycheck, market rate. If you are late once you are out, if you complain once you are out. I looked down at him. Jordan stays with me during your shift. You pick him up every night. You raise him, you feed him, you learn to be a father on a budget. And if you work hard, if you show up every day for 5 years without asking me for a dime, maybe I will let you drive the Porsche again. Do we have a deal? Tyson picked up the key. He gripped it tight. He looked at the contract. Then he looked at me and tears streamed down his face. Yes, sir, he said. We have a deal. Get up, I said. You have a shift in the morning. And Tyson, tuck your shirt in. You represent me now. 3 months had passed since the purge of New Year's Eve and the world had turned towards spring. I stood on the catwalk overlooking the main distribution floor of Coleman Logistics, formerly Apex Marketing. Below me, the warehouse was a hive of activity with forklifts buzzing and conveyor belts humming. In the center of it all was employee number 442, Tyson Coleman. He was not wearing a suit. He was wearing a gray uniform shirt with his name stitched over the pocket and steel-toed boots that were scuffed from use. He was lifting a crate that weighed 50 pounds, swinging it onto a pallet with a grunt of exertion. Sweat was running down his temples and his hands were covered in dust. He looked tired. He looked exhausted, actually. But when he wiped his forehead and joked with the foreman next to him, there was a light in his eyes that I had never seen when he was sitting in corner offices pretending to be important. Every evening at 5:00, Tyson punched out. He did not go to a bar. He walked 3 blocks to the small 2-bedroom apartment I rented for him. I visited him there once a week for inspection. It was not a palace. It had linoleum floors, and the furniture was second-hand, but it was clean. On Tuesday night, I watched him cook spaghetti for Jordan. The sauce was from a jar, and the garlic bread was slightly burnt, but Jordan was eating it like it was a gourmet meal. Tyson was laughing, wiping tomato sauce off my grandson's chin. There were no nannies. There were no iPads to distract the boy. There was just a father and a son figuring it out. Tyson was learning the value of $1 because for the first time in his life, he was trading his sweat for it. He paid me his rent on the first of the month in cash. He never asked for a discount. He never complained about his back hurting. He was becoming the man I always hoped he would be, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever witnessed. While Tyson was climbing his way up from the bottom, Paige was digging herself deeper into the hole. My private investigator, Marcus, kept tabs on her, not because I cared about her well-being, but because I knew a narcissist never accepts defeat quietly. Paige had landed a job as a cashier at a discount grocery store 3 towns over. It was the only place that would hire her with a pending criminal record for forgery. She was living in a basement apartment that she paid for under the table, likely with money she swindled from whatever friends she had left. Marcus sent me photos. She looked haggard. Her roots were showing her designer clothes were sold or ruined, and the perpetual scowl on her face scared away customers. But she was not just miserable, she was plotting. She had been posting vague threats on anonymous message boards about getting what she was owed. She had been stalking Tyson's schedule. She knew he was at work all day. She knew Jordan was with me. But she also knew that on Thursdays, Jordan had soccer practice at the elementary school. On the 2nd Thursday of April, Marcus intercepted a text message Paige sent to her mother, who was currently fighting deportation proceedings in a holding center. The text read, "I am going to get him today, Mom. Once I have Jordan, they will have to listen. They will have to pay me to give him back. I want $500,000 or I disappear with the kid." It was a kidnapping plot. It was amateurish and desperate, but that made it dangerous. She thought she could snatch Jordan from the field, use him as leverage, and extort a retirement fund from me. She forgot that I do not leave my assets unprotected, especially the human ones. I did not call the police immediately. I wanted to catch her in the act. I wanted there to be no ambiguity about her intentions. I called my security team. I called the school. And then I drove to the soccer field. I parked my truck under the shade of an oak tree. I watched Jordan running drills in his oversized jersey. He was laughing, kicking the ball, chasing his friends. He was safe. Standing on the sidelines, dressed in plain clothes, were two of my best security contractors. They looked like parents, but they were watching the perimeter with the intensity of hawks. At 4:15, a rusted sedan pulled into the lot. Paige stepped out. She was wearing a hoodie pulled low over her face and sunglasses. She looked nervous, twitching and checking over her shoulder. She walked toward the field, not through the main gate, but skirting the fence line toward the spot where the kids took their water breaks. She was moving fast. The whistle blew for a break. Jordan jogged toward his water bottle near the fence. Paige lunged. She grabbed the chain-link fence with her fingers, calling out to him. "Jordan, baby, come here. It is Mommy. Come here quick, I have a surprise for you." Jordan stopped. He looked at her. He looked confused. He took a step back. "Come on, Jordan!" she hissed, her voice desperate. "We have to go, now!" She reached over the fence, trying to grab his jersey. That was enough. I signaled my men. They moved instantly. Before Paige could even touch the boy, one of the guards had her wrist. He twisted it behind her back and pinned her against the fence. She screamed a high-pitched wail of shock and rage. "Get off me!" she yelled. "That is my son. I have rights." The second guard stepped in, blocking her view of Jordan, who was now being ushered away by the coach. The police cruiser I had waiting around the corner pulled onto the grass, sirens chirping. I stepped out of my truck and walked across the field. Paige saw me. Her eyes went wide with hatred. "You set me up," she screamed, struggling against the handcuffs the officer was snapping onto her wrists. "You old devil, you set me up." I stopped 5 feet away. I did not raise my voice. "I did not set you up, Paige," I said. "I simply let you be yourself. You violated the restraining order. You attempted a custodial interference, and we have the text messages proving intent to ransom a minor. That is kidnapping, Paige. That is a federal crime." The officer read her rights as he shoved her into the back of the squad car. She kicked the window, screaming curses at me, at Tyson, at the world. She was not a mother fighting for her child. She was a criminal fighting for a payday. And she had lost. I watched the car drive away. I looked at the soccer field where Jordan was safe. I took a deep breath. The threat was neutralized. The cancer was cut out. That evening, Tyson sat across from me in my study. He was still wearing his work uniform, smelling of cardboard and sweat. On the desk between us lay a stack of documents. They were the divorce papers. "Paige is in custody," I told him. "The DA is charging her with attempted kidnapping and extortion. She will not be getting bail." Tyson nodded slowly. He did not look sad. He looked relieved. He picked up the pen. "I am sorry she did that, Dad," he said softly. "I am sorry she put Jordan through that." "It is done," I said. "Sign the papers, son. End it." Tyson signed his name with a steady hand. He pushed the papers back to me. He looked at the clause regarding custody. Sole legal and physical custody awarded to the father. "She never loved him," Tyson said, his voice breaking slightly. "She only loved what he represented. A shackle to you, a meal ticket." I stood up and poured 2 glasses of whiskey. I handed one to him. "You are the father now, Tyson," I said, clinking my glass against his. "You are the one who protects him. You are the one who raises him. And you are doing a damn good job." Tyson took a sip. He smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I have a shift in the morning," he said. "I need to get home." "Go home, son," I said. He stood up, tucked the contract copy into his pocket, and walked out the door. He walked with his head up. He walked like a man who owned his own life. I watched him go. I turned off the lights in the study. The house was quiet. The war was over. And for the first time in a long time, I knew that the future of the Coleman name was in good hands. Not because of the money in the bank, but because of the man walking down the driveway. The snow was falling again, but this time it did not feel like a shroud covering a dead world. It felt like a clean, white sheet pulled over a warm bed. It was Christmas Day, exactly 1 year after I had spun my truck around on the highway and declared war on my own flesh and blood. I stood in the kitchen of my brick house in the neighborhood that Paige had once turned her nose up at. The air was thick and heavy. but it was a good heaviness. It smelled of hickory smoke, brown sugar, and the sharp tang of my secret barbecue sauce bubbling on the stove. I had been up since 4 in the morning, just like every year, tending to the smoker in the backyard. The ribs were resting on the counter, wrapped in foil, steaming gently. The collard greens were simmering with smoked turkey necks. The sweet potato pie was cooling on the rack. I looked around the room. It was not a mansion. There were no marble countertops or sub-zero refrigerators. The cabinets were oak and the floor was linoleum that I kept spotless. But the house was alive. The radiator hissed and clanked in the corner, pumping heat into the room. The Christmas tree in the living room was real, a 6-foot Fraser fir that smelled of pine needles and sap. It was decorated with ornaments that did not match. There were glass balls from the 70s, hand-painted wooden stars, and a few construction paper snowflakes that Jordan had made in kindergarten. It was not an Instagram aesthetic. It was a home. Parked in the driveway outside was my Ford F-150. Next to it was a modest sedan, a used Toyota Camry that Tyson had bought with his own money 3 months ago. He had saved for the down payment from his warehouse wages. He paid the insurance himself. He washed it himself every Sunday. It was not a Porsche. It did not turn heads, but it started every morning and it got him to work, and it belonged to him in a way the luxury SUV never had. I stirred the sauce and tasted it. It was perfect. I wiped my hands on my apron and listened to the sounds coming from the living room. It was the sound of a battery-powered train set chugging around a track and the high-pitched laughter of a 6-year-old boy. It was the best sound I had heard in decades. Dinner was over and the table was a wreckage of bones and empty plates. We had eaten like kings. There were no ascots. There were no discussions about vintage wines or keto diets. We ate with our hands and we wiped our mouths with paper napkins, and we talked about football and the weather and the inventory counts at the warehouse. Tyson sat at the head of the table where he belonged. He looked different than he had a year ago. The softness was gone from his face. His jaw was defined, covered by a neatly trimmed beard that had a few specks of gray in it. His hands were rougher. There were calluses on his palms and a small scar on his thumb from a box cutter. He looked tired in the way a man looks when he has put in an honest week of work, but his eyes were clear. The shadows of anxiety and the desperate need to please were gone. He wore a flannel shirt tucked into jeans, and he sat with a posture that said he was comfortable in his own skin. I started to clear the table, reaching for the platter of bones. "Sit down, Dad," Tyson said. His voice was firm but gentle. "I can get it," I said. "I am already up." "Sit down," Tyson repeated. "You cooked. I clean. That is the rule." He stood up and took the platter from my hands. He stacked the plates efficiently, scraping the scraps into the bin. He carried them to the sink and turned on the water. I watched him squeeze soap onto the sponge and start scrubbing. He did not complain. He did not look for a dishwasher to do the work for him. He just washed the dishes. It was a small thing, a mundane chore, but to me it was a symphony. It was the action of a man who understood service. It was the action of a son who respected his father. In the living room, Jordan was playing with the new Lego set I had bought him. He was building a castle. He was humming to himself, safe and warm and loved. He did not ask about his mother. He had not asked about her in months. Paige was a memory, a ghost that haunted the periphery of our lives but could not touch us here. She was serving 3 years in a minimum security facility for attempted kidnapping and fraud. She sent letters sometimes, but the prison psychologist said she was still blaming everyone but herself. We did not read them. We focused on the castle Jordan was building. Tyson dried a plate and put it away in the cupboard. He leaned against this counter and looked at me. "The ribs were good, Dad," he said. "Best ones yet." I nodded, sipping my iced tea. "The wood was dry this year, burned hot." Tyson smiled. It was a small, private smile. He looked around the kitchen. "I got a promotion," he said casually. I raised an eyebrow. I knew, of course. I signed the paperwork. But I wanted him to tell me. "Is that so?" I asked. "Yeah." Foreman offered me a shift lead position. $2 raise. More responsibility. I will be managing a crew of 5 guys on the loading dock. "Congratulations, son," I said. "You earned it." "I did," Tyson said. He looked down at his hands. "I really did. I didn't ask for it. I didn't know the owner. I just worked." He looked up at me, and for a second his eyes shimmered with emotion. "Thank you, Dad," he whispered. "For the ribs," I asked, feigning ignorance. "No, Tyson said. For saving me. For burning it all down. I hated you for it. You know that, right? Last year I wanted to kill you. I thought you were the devil. But you were right. I was drowning and I didn't even know it. I was a slave to things I couldn't afford and people who didn't love me. You set me free. He walked over and put a hand on my shoulder. He squeezed it. It was a strong grip. Merry Christmas, Dad. Merry Christmas, son, I said. He went into the living room to help Jordan with the castle gate. I stayed at the table for a moment listening to them. I watched my son get down on the floor and play with his son. I saw the way Jordan looked at his father with hero worship in his eyes. Tyson was his rock now. Tyson was the man who provided the roof and the food and the safety, and he was doing it on his own. I stood up and walked to the window that looked out over the front yard. The snow was falling harder now, covering the world in white silence. I could see my reflection in the glass. I saw an old man with gray hair and a lined face. I saw Lucius Coleman. People talk about love like it is soft. They talk about it like it is a warm blanket or a sweet word. They say a parent should give their children the world. They say you should shield them from pain and give them everything you never had. But looking at my reflection, I knew the truth. That kind of love is easy. That kind of love is lazy. It creates weak men and entitled women. It creates monsters like Paige and victims like the old Tyson. True love is hard. True love is watching your child suffer and refusing to intervene because you know the suffering is the fire that refines the gold. True love is risking your relationship to save their soul. I had risked everything. I had risked losing my son forever. I had risked being alone for the rest of my life. I had become the villain in his story so that he could become the hero in his own. I looked out at the street. Somewhere out there in the cold world, there were people like the Millers and Page people who thought the world owed them a living. They were freezing tonight. They were hungry. They were bitter. But in this house we were warm. I was not just a father who paid the bills anymore. I was a father who had taught a lesson. I had taken back my money, my house, and my dignity. But in return, I had given my son something much more valuable. I had given him his manhood. I turned away from the window. I walked into the living room. Jordan looked up and smiled, holding out a red Lego brick. "Help me, Pop," he said. "I need a tower." I sat down on the floor next to my son and my grandson. My knees cracked, but I did not mind. I took the brick. "Let us build it together," I said. "I am Lucius Coleman. I am 71 years old. I have millions in the bank and properties across the state. But right now, sitting on this rug building a plastic castle with the two men I love most in the world, I am the richest man on earth. And no one can ever take that away from me again." This journey taught me that the most dangerous thing a parent can do is shield their child from the consequences of their own actions. For years, I thought love meant giving Tyson the life I never had, but I was only crippling him. True love isn't a blank check. It is the courage to let those you love hit rock bottom so they can finally learn how to stand up. I had to break my son's heart to save his soul. Dignity is not negotiable, and sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the opportunity to earn their own self-respect. If you believe that respect must be earned and not bought, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments, do you think I was too hard on Tyson, or was it exactly what he needed? I'll be reading your answers.